extraterrestrial?
Come on in, take a seat. Welcome to Paratopia. It's me, Jeremy Vaney. And I'm without the Jeff this week because he has had a family emergency he has to tend to. But I'm going to do my best to not suck. And of course, that's easy to do when I'm interviewing Tiokasin Ghosthorse. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but first, there's something I need to promote. If anyone, I smell a setup. If anyone is in the New York State area on Saturday, March 31st at 6 p.m. at the Niagara County Community College Fine Arts Auditorium / Arts and Media Building F for absolutely free, donations accepted to benefit Niagara Hospice, but absolutely free, Saturday, March 31st, 2012, 6 p.m., Niagara County Community College, Fine Arts Auditorium, Arts and Media Building F. Alien abductions. Are we safe from the threat? Dr. David Jacobs, the world's foremost alien abduction researcher, and Linda Cortilli, allegedly abducted in 1989 from her 12th floor Manhattan apartment, present their views about this compelling and controversial question. The question again, are we safe from the threat? Well, we at Paratopia know we haven't been safe from the threat since Emma Woods came forward. But apparently that message hasn't spread everywhere because here he is speaking again. And now he's double teaming with Linda Cortilli, and I'm wondering if this is going to be some sort of lecture that they're going to do together, or if it's going to be more of a steel cage match, because as it turns out, Jacobs kind of thinks she's full of shit from everything I've heard. And in fact, back when he and Bud Hopkins were doing a Nova special for PBS, he told producer Denise Delaney that he had grave doubts about Linda's reliability. So he went from saying that he has grave doubts about Linda's reliability to taking the stage with her. And I don't know how Linda feels about him, but I have seen emails from her webmaster to Emma Woods expressing nothing but negativity toward David Jacobs and his work and the harm that he has caused her. So if that's any indication of how Linda's camp feels about David's camp, then this should be fun. And I recommend that anyone in the area go. It's free, like I said. Go there. Ask him the hard questions. I'm sure they're going to be doing a Q&A. Ask her the hard questions. Because as we know from Carol Rainey's expose, there was a lot that didn't make the Brooklyn Bridge book. Let's go down a list of her claims, shall we? This Linda Cortilli. And note to yourself that the more I read, the more ludicrous it sounds. But it didn't sound ludicrous when you thought she was being pulled through a wall and a window by an alien tractor beam. That part was the part that you were willing to buy. Hey, I'm sure shit like that happens, and I know that I've had my share of similar strange experiences. But even so, even as an experiencer, I find it odd that anybody believes me. I find it odd that anyone is willing to go, Jeremy became God that one time, or even entertain any of this stuff. Yeah, Jeremy was abducted by aliens the day he, Anyway, but then maybe the difference between my outlandish crap and her outlandish crap is that I don't then go on to say any of the following. Linda Cortilli claims that she was abducted with John Gotti. She was racing away from one of the towers on 9/11, barefooted with glass stuck to her feet. Which actually, out of all of her claims, that's the least ludicrous, except that she's, I believe, not on any official list of people that were there that day, because there's actually an official list, and she ain't on it. If I'm wrong, feel free to correct me. But then please answer some of this other stuff. Abducted with John Gotti? Abducted with Secretary General of the UN? I mean, it wasn't just that a UN guy saw her abduction. She later claimed that she was abducted with him. Emotionally bonded with one of the Secret Service agents that's been after her. And her son may be his. So in this claim, she's been paired with one of these secret agent men since she was a little kid by the shady aliens, and then was forced to make sweet, sweet love to him, producing little Johnny. Ah, there he is now. Maybe this happened. Maybe. We don't know. She doesn't want to get a DNA test because she wouldn't want to upset the family. So presumably the family doesn't know any of this other stuff. Family doesn't know. Well, never mind. Spirited away in the night to meet with the Pope about UFOs. Apparently the Pope was in town. He was like, where's that Linda Cortilli? I want to talk to her about UFOs. Didn't have anything better to do. Has immortal blood cells. I'm not really sure what that means, but I wonder if she talked to the Pope about that. She's related to Joan of Arc. Anyone aware of this? And this is my favorite Linda Cortilli factoid. Back in the 1960s, our heroine, Linda Cortilli, went by the name Lynn Long. And she claimed that she was the lead singer for the all-girls group The Angels, who, if you recall, recorded the 1963 hit, My Boyfriend's Back and You're Gonna Be in Trouble. So she claims that was her, the lead singer for My Boyfriend's Back and the Angels. Her, because the lead singer that is credited with singing the song couldn't make it that day. Stepped aside, something happened to her. In any event, Lynn Long, Linda Cortilli, Linda Napolitano, Linda Napoleon Complex, whatever her name is, she lost her voice in the shower one day. And that's why she's no longer a singer. That's a real tragic turn of events. And I probably shouldn't make fun of it. So I'll let you make fun of it. Anyway, and of course we all know that her cousin Connie called Bud, and it turned out that that was actually her, or at least Bud thought that was her. And you know what's funny is I'm reading back over George Hansen's work on the case, and he refers to all of this as Dungeons and Dragons, which is something that Jeff and I say all the time, Dungeons and Dragons for adults, right? So once again, Hansen has beat us to the punch on on something here. The Dungeons and Dragons, I was going to say quip, but really it's an insight. And of course he goes on to make the correlation between the priests of high strangeness being the intermediary between the gods and the humans, and then that role sort of being taken over by Dungeon Master, in this sort of game that these adults play. And one thing that he harps on, quite rightly, is that Linda at one point claimed that she was kidnapped, assaulted, battered, harassed, and nearly drowned by agents of the U.S. government. Right? These two harassers who saw her being floated out the window, one of whom may or may not be the father of her son, Johnny. Well, they tried to kill her. And apparently that's not a big deal, right? Because who did anything about it? Why weren't the police called? Why is this just part of a story? Like, his point is there's no real-world adult reaction to a situation that is allegedly real. Therefore, it's Dungeons and Dragons. It didn't really happen. But I want to make another point, which is assaulted, battered, harassed, and nearly drowned. Isn't that exactly what happened to Emma Woods with her alleged hybrids? Isn't that why she can't go to the ocean anymore, or has a hard time driving by it, at least? Because she had this memory co-created with David Jacobs through hypnosis of exactly that. Of these alien humans drowning her. Because, that's what they came here to do. Rape our white women and then drown them. All of this And she's basically a working stiff like you and me, lives in a small apartment in the middle of New York. Yeah, that's a pretty amazing life. I mean, it's a lot to ignore, actually. I'm surprised that she didn't protest when she saw that stuff wasn't in the book. Anyway, my best to them. Also next week, I'll have Nancy Burns on the program to discuss some new David Jacobs audio. David Jacobs is at it again. And even though this audio is, of a questionable sexual nature, as are a lot of his clips these days, that to me is sort of the maybe point. Like, what is going on with that? Maybe. But I think Nancy Burns really nailed one of the issues that is not a maybe. It's really, at the very, very least, a huge problem with Jacob's work, which is that he, in this case, has Emma under hypnosis and is just talking, as Nancy joked, it's like he's going over his shopping list, his to-do list for that day. I mean, just anything. It's like this is his social outlet or something. But it's even more than that. It's more along the lines of David Jacobs knows what this is. He's just waiting for the person under hypnosis to say it. And if the person doesn't say it, then he's going to say it for them over and over again until they finally do say it. That is what's going on in this audio, if nothing else, and quite possibly something else. So we'll play that for you next week because he hasn't gone away yet, and he needs to. I don't understand this. I mean, I get, this is the point where Jeff is supposed to interrupt me and tell me, well, that's ufology, blah, blah, blah. But, and we get that, right? I mean, we all get that, except that there are certain people like former Dr. Richard Boylan, he's still calling himself doctor, who I think most people don't even know who he is at this point. I mean, he was a prominent player, but he was so disgraced and actually had his ability to practice taken away from him in the state of California for his own questionable behavior with his clients that he is now a real sideshow, I mean, I make fun of him, and that's probably how most of you know who he is at this point. And then there's people like Alfred Weber, who up until last year was, even though clearly a lunatic, was still a mainstay of the scene. But even he was booted out of the disclosure movement, essentially, and was also booted from posting at theexaminer.com. So, are people paying attention to this guy anymore? I don't think so. Or if they are, I can pretty much guarantee you he's going to go the way of Boylan by the end of the year. Greer is a joke to most people, but he still is a main stage player. So there is something to be said for people just completely ignoring certain folks who need to go away. But there's a certain brand of person that's just a little too overboard in a certain direction, and they usually, it seems to me, are relegated to the fringe of the fringe, as Tim Binnall would say, and it seems that Jacobs at this point needs to go there instead of positioning himself as, the world's foremost alien abduction researcher. I mean, that is just, I was going to say ludicrous, but actually it's probably true. It's because all alien abduction research at this point is a complete joke. I mean, when you have abductees saying it's a joke, it's got to be pretty bad, right? So there's that. Anyway, somebody within earshot of this, please, March 31st, Saturday, 6 p.m., Niagara County Community College. Go there. It's free. Ask the questions. Bring a little recorder, whatever you have to do. If you're not that brave and you don't want to stand up and get the jeers from people, ask whoever the hell's in charge of this thing. Hey, did you know this about Jacobs? Hey, did you know these claims about Linda Cortilli that she's made? I mean, this nonsense has to end. This whole, we've got to rehabilitate our image thing is, and for Linda Cortilli, I don't even know what she's doing publicly. Like, what's the point? You're at best you're an experiencer. And so the end. It's not like you're doing research, right? So just go away. Right? I mean, unless you got another book in you where you're going to, I don't know, talk about being abducted with John Gotti and that thing with the Pope and, all the times these guys have tried to kidnap you and, explain how it is that their Crayola crayon drawings of aliens look exactly like your Crayola crayon drawings of aliens. I mean, if you're going to answer any of that stuff, well, that might be worth a read. I don't know. But what's the point of doing image rehab? That part I just don't understand unless you're the world's foremost alien abduction researcher, and then I can totally see why you would. Except that Jacobs is just going on as if nothing's ever happened. He's not even answering any of the tough questions because nobody wants to ask them. And in fact, I think I've just talked myself out of believing anything is going to be done here because Boylan was disgraced by a psych board, right? So that's the mainstream. That's not ufology. I guess if ufology had its way, we'd still be paying attention to that guy. All right, I'm going to go feed my depression while you listen to the fine Cyber Ears commercial that you're probably well sick of at this point, or have learned to love. I'm not really sure which. But after this little break, Tiokasin Ghosthorse, if you don't know who this man is, where have you been? Lakota activist, musician, does a lot for children's charities and for Indian causes all the way around. And for some blessed reason, he enjoys talking with us. And we love hearing from him. And actually, I emailed him and I said, Tiokasin, I would love to do an episode where we talk about your background, because I don't think our listeners know a whole heck of a lot about where you came from, how you grew up and all of that. And that's a fascinating story. So that's really what I wanted to get into. And I'd even said, let's stay away from the paranormal if we can on this episode. But naturally, I had questions. So it got there eventually. But he's both hard and easy to interview. Easy because you can ask him anything and he can just go. And you might think he's sort of getting off track and going off in tangents and things like that. But if you really listen, he's not. He's circling back. He's actually, you ask him a question and you get this complete, full answer that includes things that you never imagined. So it's like, well, you'll hear it in the very beginning. I make a quip about his name and, we get like a historical lesson involved in why names are important. And he brings it right back. And by the time he comes back to the topic, it's like, I feel like the hard part of the interview is any questions I wanted to ask him along the way aren't important by the time I get to ask them. Because I'm like, my head is already, okay, what do I do here? Do I go to the next topic? Or do I go back in and deal with the minutia of what I just heard? So sometimes I go back and deal with the minutia, but a lot of it I just let go. And he's one of those people that I could talk to forever. I could pick his brain forever. He's, to me, I think he's a genius. And I find his perspective fascinating. And I think if there's any through line in this interview, it's actually about the way that we use language, which I've understood the importance of, probably since picking up Noam Chomsky's books on linguistics. People probably forget that Noam Chomsky, for all of his political activism, was actually a professor of linguistics. I'm still not certain which comes first here. It's a chicken and egg thing. Does a thought process produce language, or does language produce a thought process? I mean, it may have been that a thought process produced our language, but the way that we use language certainly does influence our thought process at this point. At this point, it's a closed circuit, and it's issues like these that never get raised on shows like this that I think make this important, because as you know, and as you're probably sick of me saying, we have to know what we are before we can ask what the other is. Well, we have to know what we are anyway, right? And that includes the topics that you least expect, language being one of them. Anyway, I will say more after the show. Here is the Cyber Ears commercial, and then Tiokasin Ghosthorse.
If you record audio for any purpose, chances are you want it to be heard. You want to attract the largest audience possible who can hear your message. That's where we come in. We're cyberears.com, a revolutionary internet service that will host your audio files and help you promote and track its popularity. Considering hosting a podcast to the world? We have all the automated tools to make the process as simple and easy as it can be. No technical mumbo-jumbo to work out. CyberEars.com does all the work for you. You record it, we take care of the rest. So don't delay. Go to CyberEars.com today and register for a free trial account. Upload your audio files and get heard. With CyberEars.com, it's your audio on your terms.
Paratopia, please welcome back to the program the man with the coolest name on Earth, Tiokasin Ghosthorse. Tiokasin, thank you for coming back on Paratopia.
Hey, Jeremy, thank you for asking me again.
Do you recognize that you have the coolest name on Earth, or does that just not even affect you?
Oh, it doesn't affect me. When people pronounce it correctly, then I do know what it means. But when you anglicize it, it kind of loses all purpose, really. It sounds cool in English, but it doesn't mean the same thing in Lakota. But in Lakota, you'd say Tiokasi rather than Tiokasin. And Tiokasi merely means spirit coming in my language. And of course, Ghosthorse is Taishuke Wanaki, which doesn't mean ghost horse. That first word, the second word meaning Wanaki really can't be translated. But the first word is something like a horse. And then because we say what we're talking about first, we'd say in English it was horse ghost, right? So we talk about the horse and then what it is later, right? So it's almost like if we spoke English, it would all sound backwards. Whereas in Lakota, we talk about what it is and then describe it later. In English, you sort of describe it and then build up to what it is. So it sort of has this drama to it, you know. So the difference in that way of thinking. So names mean a lot, actually, and you hardly find anyone who has the same names except for when the American government came in and forced us to have these names so that they could say them and interpret them, that we wouldn't be able to have our own names because they could not say them. So they kind of forced names upon us as well as a tribal enrollment and a prisoner of war number upon us. So to this day, all Indian Reorganized Governments, or IRA, which was the Indian Reorganization Act, forced us to be citizens within the United States in 1926. But we were forced to have names way back in 1880, I believe it was, with the Dawes Act, where it privatized all land and made, individualized our land, and that from then on we had to pay taxes, and if we couldn't, we lost that land. And of course, you have a people who just never had money in the first place, and then you understand that concept of money. And so that's how 52 million acres of land was taken away from us during that period from the 1880s until 1934. And from that time, from 1926, when we were disenfranchised with citizenship, although we could not vote, until 1978, most of us as Native people, and so there was a 1926 until 1934, there was a general opening of lands that were done underhanded in a legal manner, I suppose, within the construct that this country has set up for Native peoples, and to disavow that we actually owned anything. And so they, again, they came in and charged taxes where in their treaties and in their constitution it says that we wouldn't have to pay land taxes for what we have given up. And yet they came in and did did the swindling, and we lost even more land. So that means connections to the land. And so that's why names mean a lot, because they actually talk about the energy, you as connected or related individual within your clan, or the Tioshpae, which is a system of a family, extension of that family, first, second, third, fourth cousins and things. And so you remember who you related to so that you had no inbreeding, so to speak. And so when people ask you as a Native person, who are you, where's your family from, and then they keep that story, and they know, oh, this one's name is Tiokasi. And so Tiokasin is related to this family on his mother's side and his father's side, and then the grandmother and grandmother, grandfather and great-grandfather. It goes that way. It goes, maybe sometimes the keepers go back to 7 generations. They can remember that far, who is related to who, and as you know, each generation gets larger and larger. So, that's how it is remembered from then on. So that's how we do things, and it's still done. I know people may not think it is, but it's still done in that old way, as well as adapting to this other way where everybody seems to have John Jr. and John Sr. and John the Third and all that stuff. So
wow.
Anyway,
that's fascinating. I didn't know you didn't have the right to vote until 1978. That's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, that was the right to pray. That was called the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. And even then, we still don't have the total freedom of religion, so to speak, because they could never define that we had a religion, because we are non-dogmatic, or neither did we believe in many gods and things like that, because that's where religion comes in and gives you this idea that there is one supreme being and rules all over others, and that's a dominant theory. But we can talk about that.
Yeah, well, I want to get into that. I want to get into your background. But there's a question that I've always, I shouldn't say always, I've had for a while now, which is, we always talk about, do you call your people Indians? Do you call them Native Americans? And I was wondering if that whole thing of trying to call an entire race a thing, an Indian, a Native American, is that something that that the Lakota even had a concept for, or is that something that we invented? I mean, as far as you know, was there any sense of being a Turtle Islander above and beyond the clan or above and beyond the tribe?
In a sense, we knew in relationship we had to make use of the land, in a sense that we took care of it, and that's why the thing is, let's start this with we called ourselves Lakota, which within that whole there was 3 divisions, if you'd say, of peoples who spoke the same language with a different dialect, which is Dakota and Nakota. The Lakota were the first, actually are the largest clan, and we were in the areas of the Black Hills, which is near the center, the geographical center of North America. And when the Europeans, the foreigners came, they saw that, the Dakota and the Nakota, which were in Minnesota and Wisconsin and up in Canada, and that the Lakota were just gradually finishing our migration that we were told to go in this great circle. And so when they saw the Lakota moving west, they thought that we were migrating out there when there were already Lakota there in that part of the country and the land, and that some of the people were told to go around in that giant circle. And it took maybe several hundred years, but all the other so-called tribes down through Texas and the Gulf states and over through Florida up into the eastern seaboard and up into Mohawk country, all have their stories about us coming out and around and leaving certain ceremonies and language. And for instance, a lot of Cherokee have a lot of Lakota words within it. Mohawk have one of our ceremonies. The Iroquois Confederacy has one of our ceremonies. And so when we were coming back in, they saw us migrating and said that, oh, they're moving out there. They moved away from, and they went to the plains. So it's a whole story of, their story. That's what we say. And we'll listen to it. We laugh because everybody want to make up stories about the natives. And then Lakota, when you come down to it, that name really means allies, or people who make friends, who make allies. And then later on, we were called the Sioux, which is a French, a Ojibwa dialect, Nadeawasu, meaning the large or the smaller snake who's hard to find in the grass. Now, think about the word snake and what that means to people in the Judeo-Christian philosophy is that it's evil. Well, the snake is more than that to us. It represents the galaxy because it's spiral in that sense. So we were hard to find in the grass according to the Ojibwe because grass back then and Dakotas were like 6 to 10 feet. So they called us that. Now the Mohawk and those people were called another word that meant the bigger people, the bigger snake, hard to find among the trees. So this is sort of their description of there was this spiritual people to the west and a spiritual people to the east. And when the French came in, they could not say the word Nadeawasu, and so they could only say Sioux. But if you only use that part, Sioux, then in the interpretation, the closest that could come to being interpreted in translation meant enemy. And yet the word didn't really exist, but it had to come into play somehow. So the French used it to say that's the enemy. And then the government later came along and said, oh, we're going to use this because that tribe, the Lakota, had to become the enemies because that's they're fierce. They didn't want us there. So that's sort of a modernization of why they say Lakota Sioux, which is a really oxymoron because you're saying the Lakota are makers of friends and enemy at the same time. So I guess a modern day word would be frenemy type of thing.
So when you hear Native American or you hear Indian, do you identify with either of those?
We do because of the language, but we have to go back to history that, that Indian history didn't start until Columbus landed, and so the rest of Western or actually Eurasian people started using that because they couldn't pronounce our names, which essentially and basically meant human beings, and that's all it meant. But that Indian started when this country or this Western Hemisphere was so-called discovered by Columbus, and so that's what they said. And because he asked, right, even though we couldn't understand Spanish or Portuguese or whatever language he was speaking, we came to find out that he called us Indians, but all the time the native people were saying we are the human beings. We are human beings. We are the human beings, and no one took that into credibility because the following year in 1493 he returned with a decree of the papal bull saying that because of the Pope and the discovery of the Western Hemisphere, that because these peoples did not have a God or believe in a dogma that they did, that therefore they were non-human beings, and therefore all the land lay claim and empty because there were no human beings here. There were men-like people, human-like people, and so they had to call us Indians. So that's opened up the Western Hemisphere to say that, it's wide open, come and take what you wish, And then they named the place America, not after Amerigo Vespucci, but America was a feminine Latin word it goes way back, and it's ame is essentially the etymology of that word is ame is the love of, and rica is wealth and riches. So you see the love of wealth and riches, and so you see greed intended America because you call that land the love of wealth and riches, and that's what it was. So He placed upon that a possession ceremony by Columbus, and with flags flying and no one objecting, was in their journals saying this. And the Native people, of course, they wouldn't object because they couldn't figure out what this guy was doing, sticking this staff into the island down there and claiming a name of his god. And they couldn't understand the language. So there was an actual possession ceremony that Columbus did. He brought the thought form of domination into the Western Hemisphere. And I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of guff for this, but domination, the concept in many indigenous nations in the Western Hemisphere did not exist. Domination did not exist, merely because it's not a horizontal way of thinking. It's always a vertical way of thinking. And out of domination comes science and religion and patriarchy and ways to run government and top-down type of thinking processes. And I think that type of thinking processes actually disconnects you because it's in the language and you could tell the language. So, no, we consider are still do to this day Lakota from my people. Now, the other 550 other nations that we call nations that still exist inside the United States actually have the same interpretation for themselves. They would rather be called their names respectfully as a tribe, so to speak, rather than Native Americans. But because of the language we use, we'd rather be called Indians because that's what they call us in the first place, but only respectfully because people don't know the history of how we got to be called Indians. Now, so you think about Native and American, it's another imbalanced thought process. Native being non-materialistic and American being totally materialistic. So we don't like that because as I was growing up, Americans were calling us American Indians. And so that changed again, and I think it was the late 70s, and it turned it into Native Americans. So now it's gone into, indigenous Americans. So it's a constant, reshuffling of semantics to say, we have to keep them as the other, because indigenous, all it means, if you take the word apart, it means the poor people over there. They're not part of us. They are the indigenous peoples. So that's the mindset. You think about the mindset says that there has to be the other. There has to be the enemy. And so that's what we as indigenous peoples in the Western Hemisphere have become, is they are different. They're the other people, and they will never be part of this great system of democracy. And this is sort of paraphrasing what Rush Limbaugh said. They're savages. There will always be savages, and savages don't change. So what do we do with savages? Well, we treat them as savages. That's basically what Rush Limbaugh said. And he is maybe an extremist, but then there's people who really do, rather if they are left or progressive or alternative mind thinkers, they may not say it, but their actions are still that of Rush Limbaugh.
Huh. Well, God, there's so much in there.
Yeah.
Where to begin?
Let's begin with something, if you let me do it.
Sure.
Someone said this, and you can probably find out who it is, and I'll tell you about it, but he said, the intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. A human being is part of the whole, called by us a universe, a part limited in time and space. We experience ourselves, our thoughts and feelings as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from the prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. We shall require a substantially new manner of thinking if humankind is to survive. and that was stated by Albert Einstein.
Do you think that when we talk about indigenous people nowadays, that's it's the same old domination thing, but in a new guise? The new guise being, indigenous equals the people that we have to take care of because they don't know any better, and the best way to take care of them is to assimilate them, which means take their land, take their stuff, and see you later, bye. I mean, do you think that's where we're at now? Is that fair to say?
I think that's such a practice that it's like, that's what we do to these people. That's and then there's the rationalities after as well. They didn't get with the program, so it's not our fault. It's sort of removing responsibility that I always talk about, and putting in then, well, if they only did it our way, then they wouldn't have to go through what they do or did, and such a rationalization of how to treat human beings and making them sort of objects of the process, and that we have to solve the problems through analyzing the approach to that problem, and we cloud any ability to make a judgment because of the rational thinking, and because rational thinkings are basically an avoidance, or actually no, an employment of emotions or prejudices. And when I think about that, you can think about the whole idea of indigenous people having knowledge to save our earth, and it's been misconstrued that we do, and I don't think that anybody has that power or that kind of knowledge to do so. But it's also arrogant to think that anyone else, especially those who think they are chosen or special people to endear as saviors, they are not enlightened either. To say non-indigenous peoples have the knowledge any more than indigenous peoples. All it is, the difference is because one lives with the land, and the experience is teaching them knowledge, and then that knowledge turns into wisdom. So when you go back to how we've been treated and how they think of us, of course it's always going to be from the top on down. If they only could do what we did, they wouldn't have the problems. Well, and you think about this stuff, Jeremy, is if you look at the problems, what did we do in exchange for all these problems and supposedly the thing the great country brought to us as native people, And I think about all of this enfranchisement, all the forms of genocide that has come to us, and you can name them. We didn't have homelessness. We weren't landless. We weren't unemployed or impoverished, starved or powerless or fearful or apathetic, bored. We didn't have a decaying culture. We didn't have loss of identity. We didn't have this. We didn't have extreme self-consciousness. We didn't have loss of free speech. We weren't jailed. We didn't have incarceration. We hardly, if anything, said anything that talked about suicide or even have revolutionary thoughts. And the last thing that was brought to us is death in the forms of genocide. And I can guarantee you, because of our quantum physics language, that there were no words and concepts for those things that I just mentioned to you. And I would say that other indigenous languages also have evolved beyond much of the words that I just mentioned to you, because indigenous language are the oldest way of communication in the world.
But you did have wars, did you not?
We didn't. Well, let's put it this way. Yes, we did. In one world, we did. That's where we say we had the lesson learned, because we almost destroyed ourselves also. And then we learned from that, and we came out of it, because we have the stories about, because of the thinking process, how that led to the wars. And that was simply because we lost contact with the processes, the natural processes of Mother Earth.
So nobody on the continent that we now consider North America had any sort of conflicts or wars or anything along those lines?
Oh, no, we did. We didn't kill each other en masse. We didn't go out there and just totally wipe out people and left and right. As far as I know in the United States. Now, we could go down and cite and find various little, maybe the Mayan, and they sacrificed and they did all these things. Of course, everybody was like that, and I'm not going to paint a pretty picture. The fact is that when I'm dealing with Lakota people, yes, there were skirmishes, but the fact that, no, we can't wipe out them. That's not the way we think. Now, you think, again, the thinking process, we're responsible for lack of a better word, sharing, because that's also meaning that we're piecemealing, we're dividing. In fact, the language that we have doesn't even have the word today for sharing. We have to make things up now to kind of fit that concept, because all we had was one thing, was giving. You see, we just gave, and that was it. And even on the eastern seaboard, the natives here didn't have the word for sharing. They only had one thing, was giving. And so they gave to the newcomers until they learned the language that the newcomers wanted everything. So, and they said, well, okay, we'll give them everything, even our lives. And that's what happened. So the Indians were removed or all killed off. And they learned that English is a language of lacking. It's a lacking language, and it always wants something, because they call them the people who always want something. And so, whether it's answers or some credibility or whatever, they're always wanting something. So that has carried on to today. So, and to bring it to say that Native people didn't have war is not true, but it's also the Native people did have war is also true also, but not in the same fashion where you'd go out and mass kill or genocide other people. It was we shared the land, and it was our turn to use that part of the country for ceremonies at a appointed time. Then we'd pull back and get the medicines, and the next tribe would come in, sort of like this flexible boundary, so to speak, an overlapping of a land usage. And we always left behind enough so that there'd be more next year. So in that way, of course, there was skirmishes and elbowing, but the recorded history was because when the white people came here, they pushed and elbowed and wanted this land. And of course, when you do that, and you're pushing other nations around, and it's sort of this chain reaction happening. So then, oh, look, they're fighting each other. They're savage too. So we'll write this down. They learn how to they scalp. We'll write this down, but they don't know who taught the Native people to scalp. And then even in the stories, Jeremy, you can go back and read that a lot of the white people who were so-called captive never wanted to come back into the society because of how this society treated its women. And so, you've got many stories like that, and that's what I'm studying. That's what I'm reading. I'm actually reading some of the books that were written by some of the so-called settlers back then. And so, yes, it is and has happened. So there you have it.
Well, yeah, I mean, just the bits that I've gleaned off of Howard Zinn's work, where he just shows these soldier diaries that are saying, I can't believe we're calling them savages, and we're the ones sicking dogs on them, we're the ones torturing them, and all of that. And it gives you a completely different portrait of, of what actually went on, the opposite portrait of what went on from what we learn in history class. But you personally, you've had quite the lifetime, and you've been subjected to, I would say, at least mental tortures early on in life. I don't know that our listeners know a whole lot about your young life. Can you maybe just give us a little sort of autobiographical sketch?
Yeah, and I guess I should say that I lost my father when I was 4, and I have 4 full brothers, and it is the way of the Lakota to, I guess, and in this society, in our society, where the grandparents also come to the rescue, so to speak, and take one of the children, if not several. And they took me. So in several years before I went to boarding school, the kill the Indian and save the man mentality boarding schools, in the 60s, they taught me and talked with me about all the things that I know today. And when you're in kindergarten and first grade, and that mindset, you really understand the transition because you're coming from that purity and understanding your way, and your sort of the foundation is set for you throughout your life. Whereas my brothers and sisters all became Christians and they lost the language, and they grew up at home, whereas I was taken away into the boarding schools, and the mental, the physical, the psychological, I guess you would say, the sexual abuse ensued for years, and dealing with not being able to speak Lakota, wear our hair the way we were taught, and accept and know, the perspectives that we had to include and to be responsible. So you were taken out and thrown into the dog pile of I have a right to something, and it's sort of considered a word, almost like if it was a cuss word, to say I or me, or a reference to self in Lakota. So you had to get over that and sort of self-abuse yourself because you were saying I and me a lot, because in the Lakota language it was like you were bragging when you said I or me. And so we had to get over a lot of different, I guess, perspectives on the world and put ourselves in front of everything, and everything surrounded you, and therefore the world belonged to you, and so you were on the road to becoming a Jesus type of thing. In my case, I simply did seek to respond in an awareness to the reality I saw unfolding around myself, and questions all the what was going on. And because of that, I did get in trouble. Spent a lot of time in what they would call detention. Sometimes we'd call it the padded room or the jail cell in boarding school. And I wasn't the only one that went through. There was a whole 4 or 5 generations full of people, or young Native people across this country that no one hears about, because they say that this statute of limitations has run out. Yet we know, as myself, do know about, and this has a relationship here. So there must be something that we feel that we still can do as even young people. And so in that way, I would help the younger ones. And even the priests and the nuns that were doing those things to us as little boys and to us as little girls, we came out of that. A lot of us were affected in very detrimental ways and could not have parenting skills, personal skills, social skills, relationship skills, and we were military. We were little soldiers in those boarding schools. And so we came out and were thrown into this society called America and expected to act and know what to do already, because people with good homes and good families, they were born and were taught those skills. But the Lakota and many other indigenous peoples couldn't have that. They just thought, well, we're Catholics now, so we come out and we have lots of kids and that will take care of the problem. And it just exacerbated the problem, because we didn't traditionally have 10 kids before Christianity came along. There was maybe 2 or 3 in a lifetime, because you had to allow that baby to grow out of the babyhood, which meant that a woman would have a kid every maybe 6 years or to 7 years until that kid, the baby turned into a kid. And the baby stuff was taken care of, and responsibility was taught. Well, you find that as younger people, even up to 3 years old, they were bringing them into the boarding schools, because that was the way this country thought of us back in as late as the 60s, even into the 70s. This happened, and continues to still happen under legal, illegal acts such as the Indian Child Welfare Act, where up to 34% of the young people now are still being taken away simply because a father may be unemployed and so has to go off the reservation to look for work, and the social worker comes onto the reservation and says, well, there's no father in the house and we're going to take the child. Or even if the father is in the house and doesn't have a job, well, we're taking the kid because the father doesn't have a job. So there's all kinds of stipulations that we have to meet in order to remain a family within the United States system of welfare, I suppose, and health, and it has many things. So, and there's a lot of things out there that people would say, well, if it's so bad on a reservation, why don't you leave? But they don't get it, because we are at home. These are our roots. This is the land that we were, we understood. So in that sense, you go back to how I became a rebel, so to speak, and to what I do now is that at one time, after resisting until, to the age of 8 or so, saying that I'm not going to give up. I'm going to go inside and hide. I'm going to go inside and I'm going to go through the motions of getting through what I have to get through. So I went inside and remained who I was. I would practice Lakota and remember the ceremonies and the thinking processes while, I was alone or in bed or things like this. And I learned how to disassociate myself with the world around me and make everything Lakota in a sense. And then as I got older, I found out that, I was indeed hurting, and I went out to find how I could heal the process that I just went through for those many years until the age of 16, where I was an excellent student because that was the emotions of it, and you figure out later on it takes 12 years for a person to listen to authority and be reflexive to that same authority and do as authority says. And I kind of found that out early, and I said, that's not the authority, because someone hits me with a whip or shoots a gun at me or is the president of the United States or sits on a pulpit or even that thing out there that they call God. That's not authority, And so I learned that from the boarding schools and became a seeker of this way that was already here, and went about to recreate and see the evolution that we have come from, and forming this counter narrative to the Euro-American mainstream diet of this junk about progress and growth and development and science and control and all these so-called inevitable forward momentum, all triumphant humanity that America flies all the time. So, I come into this world and I see even the left-ternative, which I call the left and alternative together, they become allies to the indigenous peoples, but to me today they have become the worst obstacle because they are merely the left arm of the right, and of course there's a right arm, but they're the left and right arm of the very same system, and that system is at war with Mother Earth. So you think that thinking is actually an alien thought process, because if you are from Mother Earth and know the connections, why would you destroy your own bed, so to speak?
I feel silly even going back into such a broad, sweeping account because now my question seems kind of petty, but I want to ask it anyway, which is, growing up in that boarding school, we take for granted that these Catholic schools, they disciplined kids with, corporal punishment and all of that. And we just go, well, that was their systematic way of disciplining and they learned and then they stopped doing that, or, whatever we think about that. But then when it comes to the sexual abuse, even though the church covered it up for the longest time and probably still does to the best of its ability, we never go, oh, that's systematic sexual abuse that's being perpetrated on purpose to these kids. Do you get the sense now, looking back, that the sexual abuse is systemic, or do you think that it was an aberration?
I don't think it was an aberration. I think they did it all along. I think that the fact that they could hide it for so many years without finding any of the clergy guilty of it is a phenomenon. And the fact that the people who support the churches, even today, it wasn't just in the Catholic Church, but it was the whole system of that, religion, in a sense of it was with the Episcopalians, right? And it was with the government. The government didn't have to be associated with the church. All of us had to go to church, but the government laid it on the line. They were hand in hand. And I always go back to who voted for the government, who funded those schools, but the American people. And so it's always like, well, they point fingers at it was the government. And we have to come back to the mindset of people who are allowing to happen, because they were convinced that, if you only could get an education, then you'll be in a better place. And that was the whole idea. No matter what happens to you as a Native person, you will be in a better place because we brought a better world for you. And a new world is possible if you get our education, type of thing. And so, there we go with the systematic Western institution and religions and all the time they were constantly taking the land and culture and values, trying to change your values. And even now, Jeremy, I can tell you that it did not work, and it won't work, because that systematic thinking comes from a dying way of living with Earth, and that institution is dying, and that institution is called capitalism or democracy. There's no consensus in democracy, because all those political systems such as Marxism and communism, you can go on and on, they all have a ruling class society. And that's what kept the boarding schools in place, because that ruling class society supported those churches. And so, no, if they wanted it to come out and they were so good with their system and the American way, then it would have come out. But it was all about to dominate the environment, all about to take the land. Even today, they're still trying to come after the only land that we have left, because, as the precious metals are there now on the worst land, as 100 or so 200 years ago they supposedly gave to us. So that's what we're dealing with. We're having to deal with that loss of natural surroundings due to that domination thinking, and even the social Darwinism, that so many people have just said, well, that's how it is, and this is how it's going to be, and we're programmed to just accept it without ever doing any critical personal sovereignty thinking, if that word makes sense. But you realize it. If Darwinism says the survival of the fittest, and that is the way that is supposed to be, then we as indigenous peoples are the ones who have continued to survive and will survive, because we have now become masters at it.
The way of talking and communicating and thinking and putting the object first, or putting the thing first in a sentence, is that something that is common all across the board, including the Kogi, including South American peoples? I mean, is that something that you relate to everybody along those lines with?
From the little I know about other peoples, and I do talk to other peoples about, such as the Kiowa or Ojibwe or Crow or the Blackfeet or the Nisqually or the other nations that I've spoken with, and they say, yes, we talk about that flower, basically flower is yellow type of mentality, not yellow is the flower. The flower is yellow. And description is always later, because we want to see what is in action first, not describe the action and then you guess what it is. It's kind of like guessing. So that type of thinking sort of throws you off in the first place, to describe something when you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Sort of this illusionary thinking process. So if you say the flower is yellow, it makes sense to us, because that's what it is. You're kind of putting here. I set myself up for ridicule all the time, but here, you're kind of putting a blessing on a flower by saying flower is yellow. You're aware of that flower, and that's a respect for that flower, which is also a being. And so by saying it is yellow, you're identifying it, you're being aware of it. The other thing is, like, if you say the yellow flower, you're talking about something different rather than what it is. So I think you can follow me with that.
Yeah, we put adjectives first. We say the yellow flower, not the flower is yellow. I actually agree. I mean, I think there are nuances in language that in some unconscious way influence or control us that I don't think we really fully understand. And if that's one of them, I find that fascinating. Just that little simple turn of words and all of the meaning that you put into the turn of words that we just take for granted. It's hard to know which is true. It's hard to know which is, if it matters, I guess I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think for us, because we do know the differences, because I speak it, it's that it really doesn't matter. It's just a difference in perception. You know, one is leading you into a perception, one is perceiving the leading, so to speak. You know, it perceives the lead, and the other one is leading you into the perception of somebody else. So you're able to make up and put words in like hope and believe and all those words that just sort of put you in a wishful state of being and sort of remove you from the power or the connection. So the language itself allows you to connect. So when you're saying we're going to find a higher consciousness, it's like the native people can't say that. We can only say, well, in a sense, what's wrong with this consciousness we have now? You know, it's kind of like we're going to find life over there on another planet without ever taking care of this one here.
Well, what do you do now, especially where the Lakota and I'm sure all Indians are, the object of New Age search for authority? Let's put it that way. You're the object of someone wanting an authority to come along and, for instance, explain 2012, explain us moving into a higher vibration, a lighter density. You know, I'm sure you've heard all of these terms before, and somehow the hopes and dreams of these people kind of rest with Indians of either North or South America, and we're in that time right now. We're in 2012.
Yeah.
So, what do you just laugh that off? Do you give people an answer? Do do people come up to you and ask you for your sage wisdom on these things? How does that work for you?
Totally. Each person is different, and if you really sit down and talk to them, and later, if you get a relationship with them, you talk to them in a conversation, you see that where their thinking processes come from. You know, it's either one of indoctrination, and that really is accompanied by the hierarchical reasoning to remove or to disconnect the present and move it into something non-cognizant, or this perspective worrying whether one is going to heaven or hell. You know, and so it's always that sense of not really looking at here. It's either heaven, which is a future, or going to hell, which is a future. You know, it's something that's not present. And the worry is based on a belief system. And as you know, and I described it to you before, belief or believe is also wishful, or this illusionary state that has nothing to do with the reality of spiritual practice here on Mother Earth. And this is why we as a Lakota have this white buffalo calf woman who brought us a way to respect each other rather than so-called rules of how to get to heaven, and if you don't follow those rules, you're going to go to hell. So the same thing is, let's go to those people over there. Let's go to that wise man on the mountain type of thing, because we have none here now. But we're always taught that. And if I could explain this in a very selfish way of saying this, when I looked up the word self the other day, there's 437 words to describe self, and we have not one in Lakota. I, me, self. There's not one. So you have an awareness state. So if you're in an aware state, you see things. How do I say it? Let's put it this way. If I believe in something, it's sort of the spiritually lazy way of accepting someone else's experience as your own, so you don't have to do the work, which is a very convenient way to look at hierarchy or religion and hierarchy, and it really stunts or devolves one's own experience, and even the wisdom to understand reality from that experience of personal sovereignty. And in Lakota, either you know or you don't know. And if you know, then you know you have done the work. And if you don't know, then you have not done the work. You know that you have not done the work. So what I'm saying is, if you shake a man's hand, you can almost tell that that man, because of calluses, is a man of, who works with his hands. And the same way of a woman or a man acts a certain way, you know that their experience is somewhat different than they say. You know, someone says, I'm the president of the United States, or I'm a medicine man or a medicine woman, but yet their actions are saying something different. Then you're almost, no, they kind of put themselves out there. They kind of reveal themselves by the way they act, you know.
Right.
Well, so,
what do you, I just want to get back to the prophecy aspect for a second, because I feel like this is something that we could really flesh out here in a way that I haven't heard, which is, what then is the disconnect between the way, even talking about the white buffalo calf woman, you know, we interpret what you say about that differently, or I shouldn't say we, I don't, but you know, the New Age crowd and that sort of thing. People interpret that stuff differently than you intend. How did that happen? How did this whole 2012 end of the world, beginning of a new age of enlightenment, all of that stuff? How is it something in the language? Are we not understanding what the Lakota, for instance, mean by prophecy?
I think so. I think because of the way systems and religion, hierarchical thinking and reasoning tend to make things chosen or special, such as, you know, the Messiah, and because maybe their fulfillment of responsibility within their own prophecies, which often are attached with punishment or punitive measures, whereas indigenous peoples have not punitive measures in their prophecies. All they're saying in our prophecies is there a choice. There's a choice remaining. And in that, are we really thinking and knowing that all living things are equal in this choice, and are they also deserving of the same respect? But in the other way, it's only the humans who have a higher form of late thinking and chosen and special. So we already removed ourselves and made ourselves very secular to the rest of natural processes. So they're thinking that they're waiting for the Messiah, and therefore 2012 is also that Masonic date that everything is going to change, because their calendar, which is way off, is gonna implode on itself, because you see these prophecies of time throughout the history of the United States. I guess religions all over the world have also said, well, the world's going to end on May 10th, 2011, when it never did, you know, and things like this. So that they're choosing, and all those are man-made. All those things are man-made. So what we're saying is that, no, if by experience we go down that road, then this will happen to you. Now, if we go out this road, these things will happen to you. So these things are prophecies because of our experiences that we've had. We remember our mistakes we've made in the past. So if you think about the future, that's, in a sense, prophecy is also the road that we've had in the past. We went down that road before, so we know where we're going, basically. So if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is history, of course, tends to repeat itself, and so if you find yourself in front of the same signposts that you were before, well, here's the ending of that story, and that's what the prophecy is. The prophecy is, this is the ending of that story, unless you fork off and go on a different road, and then history won't repeat itself.
Yeah, it's somewhat like that, you know, but it's all within a circle of responsibility, not because, you know, I made the right prophecy, and here's the date that's going to come, and this is what you should do. It always seems to be about oneself rather than relationship, and then, of course, we could talk about that, but, you know, the differences on thinking is so well, it's different, really. There's that thing that just sort of, I don't know what to say really about this one. It's almost like people who are taking those prophecies to heart and whatever, and actually saying, well, I want to be the one to bring the word to the people, and therefore I am the God, the Jesus. It's kind of like they're searching for the exoneration. They kind of are stuck to this never-ending plague and obliging duty to think about how we should easily accept conquest and murder because it's furthering our progress here. It's for a good cause, and yet we're not seeing that as one of the sicknesses of our time. So what I say to that, if it wasn't for the native people, the predicament, that democracy and then that type of thinking that I just talked about, the exoneration, and maybe Americans in this case feeling guilty and not really knowing why they're feeling guilty and not really doing any reconciliation work with the energy here that is native. Maybe because they were been educated so well that they've educated the wisdom out of themselves. And so if I say that, then the rationale glove, if it fits, then something right has to be done, as if they were the human being that they intend to be. Then they can stop what their forefathers' policies are still doing to the earth, to themselves, and to the people, other people, and to the animals, and really take a second look at the reasoning that people are coming up with. And all that really intends, Jeremy, is to respect means to look again. And that's what's missing from a lot of these things: science, religion, education, everything that's here. There's that word, respect, that's missing from it.
Let's talk about relationship for a minute. If you don't have the same sense of I, how do you relate to people who have that sense of I?
Oh, well, it's like a double word there, because, again, this is the thing. If we can't explain it in Lakota, how would I be able to explain it in English? How we think about that? I can only describe this one to you. If you know that your body is in this circle, is in the soul, so to speak. Your body is in the soul, and if you could imagine a circle, and within that circle where information is dotting and originating in a holistic sense, or even dependent on one's will, and it's much less oppressive, and that it cannot be explained by its component parts alone, but in relationship and responsibility, including a system that determines how the parts behave within that system. So in a relationship, data or information can be pulled from everywhere within that unending circle, including any necessary logic. Now, if you think metaphorical thinking processes of intuition, dreams, and visions, that's what's contained within that universal system or that circle. And so this is an indigenous thinking process, which is a very real feeling of awareness or presence or prescience, so to speak, and not based on emotion or personal opinion. And so in Lakota, we call this midakwe oyasi, which is a relational thinking. Now, the other way of thinking is a rational way, where there is a column which has a top and a bottom, a beginning and an ending, a better or worse, a good and a bad, with all this data arranged in an orderly fashion, which is measured and marginalized and weighed and counted and divided and individualized. So it's referring to sort of an element of calculation and planning to a stream of thoughts, and it's a kind of objective process of thinking and analytical approach to any problem. And all people are capable of thinking rationally, believe me, but people who tend to cloud this ability because of emotions or prejudices usually are the ones who are coming down on the indigenous thinking. And I think that's what we are all born with as human beings. We're all born indigenous thinkers because we all believe in magic. We all know what magic is, and we use that intuition. We use those dreams and visions as children. But, because of the rational way of thinking and the dogma way of thinking, that, we have to objectify everything now, and this is the only way that we're going to survive. And maybe that was needed in a certain way in certain parts of the world where maybe growing season was short. And you have to do everything in order to, we need this much grain in order to survive 6 months of, snow. And so you had all those time concepts and counting and dividing and weighing and marginalizing, sharing, and all those things. And so the language came out of that not having. And so, when I think of the two different ways, is that in one sense you have the complete circle with your body in the soul, and that all that information is coming from everywhere. And then being taken out of that circle being squeezed down, and you're put over here in this column that has a sort of like an eye, or a capital I or whatever, and then you're, as a circle, are put down on the bottom in a nice, neat, and in line and everything like that. But you never can reach the top. Well, and then you put that I within the circle, and the circle is missing all that information from either side of that circle, and you're only in the middle where the I is. Well, that's what's missing in this society, and those people who think like that. So what I did later on was take that little circle in that bottom eye and came back out. And I said, I can take that eye and I can put it within the circle. And because that eye is all about rights to something. It's not a responsible thing. It's a right to this and a right to that. And I have a right to this. And so you dream up ownership and rational ways of thinking about how to own, and so you become individualized, and so what I did was take that rational column, I'd say that I, and put it within the circle, because everybody thinks rational, but I turned the I, and laid it down and made it horizontal, and then I start understanding. Oh, see, we all think this way. And there's only one way, that is trying to put the relational thinker down, and that happens to be the rational way of thinking. And it has to be that way, because God would not work in the circle. God would work only in the I. The great mystery works within the circle, but the great mystery is also one of inclusion, so it has to always include the I, where the I, because it has a right to things, and it's secular and exclusive, and it has to always exclude, because it's always the only way, and we hear that all the time. So in trying to describe I and me, to short words, one is describing responsibility in relationship, and one is describing a rationality in a right to something. So, there's two ways of thinking about this. So I'm speaking English, so I have to say I, and it's almost like you cannot miss the word, because it's almost in every sentence. So I hope this is making sense to you.
Yeah, definitely. I find all of this fascinating and unfortunate,
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to keep this as far away from the alien stuff as possible, just because I don't think we've gone down that road. But I do have to ask, since I'd asked about prophecy, and I know that you are friends with Standing Elk, who is now, actually, should I say his other name, which is Golden Eagle?
I think so. It's not that I'm friends with him. I know of him, and I know his family, the Standing Elk family, which I am a friend, I think, of one of the Standing Elks, maybe his brother or cousin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because what I was going to ask you is, have you ever talked to him about the fact that he did put on the first Star Nations gathering and sort of came out with this Star Nations material? I'm wondering if he regrets it, if he's happy with what resulted, because I look at that and I look at the people who have latched onto it and formed belief systems around it and raised money off of it and all of that. And I just wonder if it was so completely bastardized that the meaning of what was said was lost, in the same way that prophecies, the sense of what a prophecy means, is lost. What is your take on how you see that material being interpreted?
Well, I think you said a little bit about that, and I just want to say it so simple is if you find a belief system, so to speak, that doesn't have thoughts of living with Mother Earth, but rather living on sort of this parasitic way of dealing with life, then if it's too good to be true, and it's not really, if it's leading into a religion, a cult, so to speak, then I don't think that is a true sense of understanding the world, because it's leading to the individual, it's leading to the I, the Messiah, the Jesus lizard, I like to call them, because they keep coming back. You cut the lizard's tail off, it's going to grow another one, so the philosophy is still going to come back because that's what people want, and they'll pay for it. And this other way, you find that the real, true medicine people really aren't heard from, and they are on the reservations, and you won't hear from them. Only the people know, and we keep them very secret. So that's another way of looking at it, too, because I know that happens, and you won't hear their words until, you actually are shown to prove that you actually are sincere and honest and have gone through the so-called experience of the pain of living to come to a place of qualifying to even know who this medicine person is. So it's a protocol of understanding, who you're working with is simply because someone gives you a pipe or gives you a Bible, so to speak, that's going to be the truth. It's the instruction behind it. It's a lifetime of learning, and no one can just come out and just state it to people. I'm sure, because I'm not a spiritual guru or a medicine man or a shaman, and never will be, and I'm I never just won't be. That's just it. I was given this road to live in this society and understand the culture that I come from, because someday that it's going to come full circle where I will be returning to the Lakota nation and knowing even and carrying on as much as possible as we can with very little. And that's the strength of being spiritual, that you can do that and be able to understand without worrying whether you have or have not, but understand and really get to the crux of the matter instead of worrying about all these charlatans or these so-called instant shake and bake medicine men and people and women that are out there. Because it's like Jeremy, they will get you on this airplane, and they will seat you in the first class, and then they will learn how to, by reading the manual, get that plane off the ground, but they'll never land, because in landing they will always crash it, and a lot of people will get hurt. And I think that's the big difference between, thinking that there is, in a sense, this is an alien form of thinking, because that same thinking is like, oh, I'm going to get money for this, so I'll go around and bless everybody and say I am the prophet and all that, and people will fall for it because they don't want to have their own experience, because having your own experience is too hard. I just still think that we have to really be careful, even of those people who say they see UFOs. I tend not to believe people who just automatically say, I see UFOs and that's what I was doing, and it's like, but we're still treating them and those people as aliens, and so that's still thinking that we're going to me, and my stretching of it, is that those aliens are going to come and save us at the last minute, and so that's why we go back to these instant medicine men, that they're going to save us and they have the code of life and all these things. And I don't think we're evolved yet to understand what the code of life is, no matter what science says or whoever supports that way of thinking. I really think that this way of thinking that we are presently doing, even in Lakota, even in English, is on its way out, because this world that's not going to be new, that mindset of new won't even make sense with the language in this way of life that's here right now. In other words, we have to understand this consciousness, and we don't have the language to even purport to know any iota of that type of wisdom and the way that's here, that energy that we need to understand. There will be this complete transformation that we'll just laugh. We'll just laugh at what we thought of ourselves, because I think we as a human race are so full of ourselves, so full that, we're going to always try to explain our way into existence or explain our way out of it. And so that dualistic thinking will always be there because of the language we use, and we can't let go of it because we don't know how.
Yeah, well, it's funny because whenever I see people talking about enlightenment, it seems like what they're talking about, at the end of it, what their expectation is living and thinking pretty much along the same lines as what you're describing. So, I mean, that's not new. That's original. That's what we're supposed to be doing. So enlightenment is just sort of doing what you're supposed to be doing, but these people who sort of espouse that type of thing, I don't think they recognize that. And because they don't recognize that, the ironic thing is they're not going to ever really get there, because they're still looking for that new thing that they could add on to themselves, as opposed to giving up that sense of self and just sort of relaxing back into being natural,
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like, they're coming in with their telling everybody, I have this cheery optimism, and it's only compounding the problem by denying the problem, and it's inferring that, I am part of that indigo nation. I am blessed, and I'm going to do these things because that's the language they've been given. And it may be innocent in their part, but there's a lot of people out there that I know from my experience that they're not innocent. They're misleading people and will continue to mislead people as long as they can get away with it.
Do you think Standing Elk was misleading people, or do you think that people misinterpreted him?
I think a lot of people are misinterpreting a lot of people. I think he may be one that has been misinterpreted. I think because we have to define what he says into this language, that we often, somebody who's different than us, somebody who seems to be open-minded and all that, we must go to him because he's different than us. But still, it's not, how do I say it, that people aren't finding within that you too are different than just as different than Standing Elk, as Standing Elk. But people don't know how to find that because of the thinking process that this society has put themselves through to lose contact with themselves. That's why they have to always reach outside of themselves and think that something outside of themselves is going to change. And all we're saying as indigenous peoples is that no human's going to change us. It's Mother Earth that is going to change everything. So we say that, we know that, because that's the way we define ourselves as indigenous peoples, that we're defined by the natural processes or the movements of Earth. And, the longer modern humans ignore that wisdom of ancient Earth cultures and think of us or it as dead, the more difficult it will be to recover from their own modern day demise, so to speak. And so we're told that Mother Earth, because of the way we behave, will begin to hide her secrets, I guess you would say, and no longer offer knowledge how to live with Mother Earth, and because we are living this archaic hierarchical, is that the word, hierarchical religions and government of jingoisms, and we persist that that's the only way. And we continue to think of those peoples because they don't speak our language correctly, or they don't think religious, or, in that scientific way of deductionism or reductionism or whatever it is, and that they are wretched of the earth, because Earth is, it's not a thinking being, but we always say that it's going to be too late when they really try to get it, because it's all about removing themselves from the reality that there is something real happening here. rather than out there. And so they're going to continue to use a language, higher consciousness, enlightenment, and all those things. You think about enlightenment. Where the hell does that term come from? It comes from Europe. What the hell is enlightenment at that time for us indigenous peoples? It wasn't enlightenment. It was something dark. We kind of like switched places. Dark Ages was happening over there. Now it's happening to us because we just don't understand what the hell enlightenment was all about. And enlightenment came because of a stealing of a continent and all the wealth and riches, and to make another continent and people, wanting that so much that, there's something outside. Let's go to the New World. Let's discover those people. Let's discover the land. Let's take and be rich ourselves. So it's always about that promised land idea that keeps happening over and over and over. And it's almost like, how long can a people beat a horse to death, And that's what they keep doing it over and over.
Yeah, well, we kill the food so that we can sell each other food. I mean, that, to me, it's as simple and as crazy as that sort of beginning. But what do the Lakota think the role of the sun is? Because we always hear Mother Earth, and just curious what the role of the sun is.
We have this, if you look at it in this way, father-son, our grandfather-son, in a sense, is the male in that energy of it, and Earth, Mother Earth, is the female. And the female grows, and the father-son, with the sunlight, gives, in a sense, life to Earth, in a sense of being the sperm of the rays that come and to fertilize the warmth of it, and all these things, and so in that way, Mother Earth and the sun affect each other. It's not because Mother Earth is so tiny and Father Sun is so big. It's the energy of each of these spheres out there, and so in this way, that universe is also the same law that creates the universe all over the place, all everywhere. It's connected. There's no difference. Because we're so used to trying to understand it with our little old minds of science, we can't understand that intuition of what the sun and the earth have together. And so, we tend to look in a condescending manner at those peoples who believe in that magic. Oh, that's nice. Those Indians believe in Father Sun and Mother Earth and moon and stars and all that stuff. How quaint. Because we have been taught to not accept that way, because that's the connection. The only connection that we have now in the society and in language is the fact that we can only reach God only through this way of belief, or if we do things in this scientific manner, or if we only speak this language, that we are going to be able to attain a higher consciousness. And there's no reality with understanding how we're beaten up on Mother Earth. And so what do you do when you beat your mother? She's going to turn around and just say, I'm sorry, kid, I have to get rid of you. You're hurting me too bad. And that's what's going to happen. And people don't want to see that reality, that they may be part of that. It's almost like when I tell people, I mean, even I'm part of that, so they can find me guilty if they want, is if I'm reading a book, a paperback book about the deforestation in Brazil. Now, how hypocritical is that, The book is made of the very same wood that I'm reading about that's being torn away, And so you think about the same process that goes on with how people look at another people, and how it's so easily that we think in war terms all the time. We're thinking about war all the time rather than the opposite of war, because that's all it knows, is that everybody fights, everybody's this way, everybody, because we imply that everybody is like us Americans. Everybody, if they're not like us, then we should fear them. And as a Native person, I know that. I have to walk out here in New York and understand that all the time, even though I know they may be joking innocently, but that's how they're taught. They either do the war whoop, or they make some reference to Native or Indians or chief or something. And I think, well, what's different than when I was in boarding school till now? Nothing has really changed. It's almost like people have become even more or less intelligent. They become less intelligent with their surroundings, and all they're worried about is jobs, getting their jobs back, and their backyards returned, regardless of what. And they think in that mindset of piece of the American pie. And if I thought that way, then I would say, well, they're obviously forgetting about who owns the bakery.
Well, then, for you personally, it's unfair to say, I guess, if you don't have a sense of hope in Lakota language. But tell me if you can answer this. I mean, do you feel hopeless about this situation, or do you hold out that things can change radically enough, or do you think that sort of the Mother Earth shirking us off is the change that's needed and is sort of the only thing that makes sense that could happen at this point?
Yeah, I think that's great. That's what it is. It is halfway through that prophecy. We will actually come out of this, but not in the context that we think. So what we say is that we're looking to 2013 and 2014 and 2015. I think we all feel something is going on. We just don't have the thinking process to think about or to explain what's going on. So we often refer back to the same old, gloom and doom mentality that the system has caused, because that's what we're afraid of. We're afraid of the future, and that it might actually be one of peace, and that because we're so much into a opposing war mentality that we don't know what the hell peace is, even if it hit us in the balls today. I think we continue with the road that we are taking now. It's still going to happen no matter what we do, because that event of Mother Earth has great compassion behind her. No matter what she does, she has to support life, or any kind of life forms that she has always, brought forth. And it doesn't. And we're so thinking about our own as human beings. That's how arrogant we are, to think that life won't happen without us. I think it will. I think maybe something will move on to where we are the last. We are the dinosaurs because of our thinking processes. So I think that Mother Earth will change it for everybody. I really do. Mother Earth is going to change it, not the atomic bombs or, by going green. That's not going to change anything. It's just Mother Earth is so tired of this and of us that she has to do something. And I think that's good, because you would want your mother to live. That's just how I think.
Well, Tiokasin, thank you so much for spending so much of your time with us and enlightening us, even though you hate that word. It's certainly been enlightening to me. I guess just one more question before we go. Do you have anything for this notion of we create our own reality? I'm really sick of hearing this. I know that there is some piece of it that is true. But then I think, well, gee, maybe it all is true. Maybe we really do create our own reality, and that's why we're in this mess, because this is kind of what we want for ourselves in some, I don't know, sadomasochistic way. I don't know. But what do you think of that when people sort of preach that to you? We all create our own reality, and in that sort of individualistic I sense of it.
Yeah, that's we all create our own reality. It's kind of like, selfish, and it's almost like you're lacking. You're not really seeing creation as it is, because creation is already there. It's already been created for us. The fact that we just aren't aware of it, and often it's taught by the Western education schools, which are often it's teaching us, and this way of alienation, and even that curriculum that has nothing to do with life on Earth, well, it de-indigenizes us to a point that we have to use reality. Put it up on the screen, on cell phones, on everything. We use that reality. We pay for it. We take a cruise. We all do all these things that we think we're enjoying, that we're paying for it. Then we come back to the same old grind, rather than live reality. But the language it uses rationalizes why everyone is at fault, because it comes from a lack of philosophy, almost as if it was starving and thirsting for spirituality. So when I'm trying to be articulate, not to go to a place of disjudgment, but it's almost impossible unless I use religious, what's the word for it, Jeremy? Emergentism or physicalism or something like that. But these become problems because we're always trying to explain consciousness. And to explain sacredness is one thing, but when you think about consciousness, we're always thinking about something else rather than what's here right now. So the dialogue remains that I am creating my own reality, so, sort of this, another excuse for not doing what you really see, or not seeing what is really there already, and that you aren't in control of it. And it's okay to not be in control of it, that it's already in control, that the mystery is already in control. And it's not a sense of believing, it's knowing and exacting the presence that's right here, rather than going too far in the future or too far in the past. And those time concepts and a lot of indigenous places do not have. We're only aware of now. That's where your body is in the soul. It becomes one of responsibility. The other way around is like to individualize. I create my own reality. It's like, what is that? What is your own reality? What does that mean? That sounds like a very lonely statement, if I was to say, and someone who wants the attention, who, if you're going to cry this statement, I create my own reality, that's what it sounds like. Someone's looking for help. But if you notice the creation here, and I'm going to drill it into people, that the creation is already here, and we're just not aware of it. Now, the reason why we're not aware of it is because we have been thinking in a language that's been so far away from it. And then we feel it, but we're still trying to explain it in the same language that took us off the road in the first place.
That is well said, friend. Thank you again. And please tell us where people can find you on the radio.
Oh, yeah, just here in New York on WBAI 99.5 FM at 9 a.m. on Thursdays. And I also heard on 41 stations around the world. And I often bring just indigenous voices to the air. But, it doesn't mean that you have to be brown-skinned or dark-skinned to be indigenous. It's just a thinking process. So, yeah, that's basically all I'd have to say. But thank you, and to let people that know that just, I don't speak for all the Lakota people. I only speak for what I experience as a Lakota living in one world. So that's where I am. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Jeremy. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Hi, this is Dr. Kirby Surprise, author of Synchronicity, The Art of Coincidence, Choice, and Unlocking Your Mind, and you are listening to Paratopia.
So the Paratopia. Tiokasin Horse Ghost, eh? Do you see the importance of language? Man, that is so smart. There's something in there that he said. I don't know if you caught this, unless I'm wrong, unless I'm interpreting this wrong, but basically if you put the object of the sentence first and you put the description or even the action after, there's something about that little twist in language that doesn't leave room for words like belief, hope. It's almost as though the way that we structure sentences either reflects our sense of psychological time, putting in these intervals between us and the ideal that we've set outside of ourselves, or the action that we should be in the now taking, but instead we react, we don't act. And either the language is reflecting it or it's actually reinforcing it. And isn't it amazing, the attention to detail and meaning that every little thing has in Lakota? And if you're skeptical about that, just consider this. they didn't have a written language. It was all oral. And so you're relaying your surroundings, you're relaying your environment and your experiences in it, your interior environment as well as the external. To not have a written language, I mean, that puts that all in the now too. It's all right now. And so the very act of observing takes on a completely different notion, there's a completely different respect for the very things that you are observing, because you're not just observing them. There's not this interval between you and the thing observed. You are the thing observed, which isn't to say you don't respect its autonomy. It's just that you are immersed in environment, and as a being immersed in environment and understanding yourself as both the environment and a thing in the environment, I think that it's hard to even say that there's a natural respect that you have for those things in the environment. It's more than that. It's self-identity. If you don't have a sense of I as an ego self, then what is your self-identity? It's with the very earth that you are. It's not that you're on the earth. You're not a conqueror of the earth. You are the earth. The earth is you. These things are inseparable, even if there are differences in the way that animals, humans, mammals, insects, plants, all of these things, the earth herself, if there's a different take on how one perceives and senses and all of that, underlying that is the oneness betwixt and between and all of that through these separate objects. And I guess, the easiest way to say that is you've got all of these things that comprise the earth. They are the separate things, but they're also the earth, right? Grass is individual, but it's also the earth. Humans are individual, but they're also the earth. So it's yes and, as we say in improv. It's both. It's individual and it's one. From what I'm hearing here, that is the original instruction of a human being, is to understand oneself that way. So this notion of enlightenment, that we call it, that I even call it, because let's face it, at the end of the day, I got a European language because I'm a European. This enlightenment that we talk about isn't adding on to the self. It's letting go the self and understanding oneself as one with the environment, in addition to the separate, unique being. But not just verbally, not just as paying lip service to something or as a belief system. This is your very being. It's now in the very fabric of your being, or should I say the very fabric of one's being is being expressed. So that's all enlightenment is, the fabric of one's being expressed. And so in some sense, the joke of it is that it's not new. It's what you always are. It's just that for some odd reason, a good portion of this planet breaks up its sense of identity along these very structured lines, and then goes to war about them. And it makes sense that you would go to war about them because essentially you are at war within yourself, right? One is at war within oneself, and then they project that onto everybody else. And everybody's doing this. Everybody's projecting it onto everybody else. It is a sickness. And we think that we can conquer this sickness by just adding on to ourselves. And it's not a matter of adding on to yourself again. It's a matter of dissolving the self and recognizing oneself. And now that's not a journey that, for instance, the Lakota have to make, right? Or at least the Lakota like Tiokasin, who are still in touch with that, still understanding the world as that. That's not their journey. That's our journey. That's white people. That's, or should I say Anglified people, because it's not just the color of your skin white. It's what white people have done to the world in conquering it, and not just white people. Any system, as he's saying, communist, doesn't matter. Any sort of hierarchical system, any society built upon hierarchical system is at war with itself and therefore at war with the world. I find all that fascinating, and then you bleed that over into when a Lakota says something about star nations. They come up with this giant revelation, Well, how do we interpret that? Well, we interpret that as there are these aliens, see, and they're out there and we're here. It's us versus them. Once again, we're at war with ourselves, so we're at war with others, and now we're going to extend that into the universe. And even if you put, as he said, sort of the happy face on that, you put the optimistic spin on it, well, that's still not dealing with the fact. So even if you say they're space brothers, it's still us and them. It's still not this recognition. It's still not coming from a place within, this recognition that I am that alien is me, or, I am that blade of grass is me. It's the same thing. We are of a tapestry, we are of a work, and the work is the thing. And so when Standing Elk talks about space people, or, space brothers, or that sort of thing, it's a completely different context than what we can hear. Man, I wish he would do Paratopia. Maybe we should extend an invitation to him. In any event, I think what he's talking about there with the Jesus lizard is dead on. I mean, that's it. It's like we've got this thought process, we've got this language. It's all this self-perpetuating thing that we use to identify and to perceive the world around us and to perceive quote-unquote others. And so we can't even hear it. We can't even hear what the Lakota are saying about prophecy. We can't hear what they're saying about star nations. We can only interpret along our lines, and our lines are to seek a belief. And that belief is either, oh, this is all bullshit, rational reductionism, or this is real, and now we've got to, worry about, well, are we going to be invaded by these galactic federations? Should we set up armaments and, or should we set up a new constitution of the globe, and meet them on that Star Trek level, set up Cosmic GATT and NAFTA? Or maybe we're waiting for them to save us. They're space brothers, and they're going to save us from ourselves because we're blowing up the earth and all of that. Cosmic Jesus, that sort of thing. All of these on their own level are a wish fulfillment. And the wish is that we, as we define ourselves, is real. That thing that we wish is real can go out and greet other beings that are just like us, however we define ourselves within those parameters. So in the case of the reduction, the materialist reductionist, we won't be greeting them at all because they don't exist. The universe had better just be made up of microbes and things we can wrap our brains around and have mastery over, or else it ain't going to exist. Well, the ironic thing is that version of us doesn't either. And so when we get back to that fundamental truth, that's really letting water out of the water balloon and recognizing that we were the ocean all along. And these things sound great. They sound flowery. They sound poetic. They sound meaningful. But they aren't meaningful because they aren't how we live. They're just things that we say. Our lip service is homage to the greater truth of us. It is a means of keeping it out there, distant from us, as an ideal, as something that warms the cockle of your hearts to talk about and to read, but to not actually be. And eventually, there are grave consequences to that, to living inauthentically. But those consequences aren't judgment, and they're not an evil being perpetrated upon us by any sort of outside agency. They just are the outcome of our mistakes and our arrogance and the wrong turn that we've made and we continue to live in spite of that unconscious nagging telling us exactly what we're doing wrong. We turn that off and we turn on the TV. I mean, that's just what we do. Until we don't.